good evening and welcome to the Wildlife Trust live session on COP30. My name is Lee Morris. I'm Director of International for the Wildlife Trusts. I'm not in Belém in Brazil at COP30, and neither am I a detailed expert on COPs. However, delightfully this evening we're going to be joined by a friend of ours from ZSL, Bethan Lachlan, who is the Senior Policy Specialist for ZSL. Bethan is out in Belém and she knows a huge amount about COP. So Bethan's going to be joining us now. I'm going to be asking us some questions, and it'd be great if any of you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get as many questions as possible out to Bethan, who's in COP30. Bethan, hi.
Hi, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, listen, it's brilliant to have you. The last time we had a chat was across a coffee in Edinburgh, so it's brilliant that we're now making this happen. So my first question for you is, what is COP30 and why is it relevant to people in the UK?
It's the question of the hour. The COP officially started just a few hours ago with the formal adoption of the agenda. COP30 is in a world of acronyms. So I'll start with explaining some of the acronyms, because it's how you make sense of this space. COP stands for Conference of Parties. So it's essentially the annual gathering of all of the parties, aka countries, who've signed up to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UN process for trying to tackle the climate crisis. They meet annually, and this year it's in the city of Belém in the Amazon, which is incredible. And we're just started. We have 2 weeks of intense negotiations to try and see what we can make happen for nature in this space.
So, Brazil hosting COP30, this is significant?
It's very significant. So, it's significant for a number of reasons. It's significant that it's happening in a country where climate change is such a major issue, where it's the largest forested country in the world. But it's also significant because this is the country where the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, was created. Back in 1992, there was a meeting called the Rio Earth Summit in Rio. And at that meeting, the UNFCCC was created alongside also the Convention on Biological Diversity and another convention called the United Nations Framework to Tackle Desertification, the UNCCD. These were all created together. So the fact that we're now back in the home of the UNFCCC over 30 years later is a really symbolic moment as we move from an era of negotiation into an era of implementation. It's also very significant because 10 years ago this year in Paris, we saw the creation of the Paris Agreement, which many people may know, that is the international agreement to try and limit temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees. So we're now 10 years on from the Paris Agreement passing, over 30 years on from the creation of the UNFCCC. So this COP is all about implementation. How can we move from an era of negotiation to an era of action? Okay,
so you work for ZSL, you're in a senior policy role. You've been to a few of these gigs before, haven't you? So just tell the audience why you're there and why that matters to ZSL. ZSL in the UK. What are you hoping to do while you're there that's going to really make a difference to us?
Absolutely, yeah. So ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, is a lot like the Wildlife Trust in that we're working all the time to try and put nature at the heart of decision making, and that's a major thing for us in the UNFCCC as well. So one of the major problems that we face within the UNFCCC is this real siloing of nature. We're not seeing nature be at the table in these negotiations when we know that nature is a major area of importance and a major solution to the climate crisis. We think it's between sort of 30 and 50% of mitigation, so climate action needs nature to be a part of it. So we know that it's an absolutely essential tool in the toolkit of trying to alleviate the climate crisis. But we also know that these systems don't properly integrate or represent nature within the negotiations. So Zevasel is here to try and fix that, to try and move nature outside of the margins, outside of the footnotes, and into the centre of the negotiations.
Thank you. I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat about the echoes. We're really sorry about that. Hopefully you can still hear Bethan and Bellum, and we're planning a couple of these during COP, so we'll work on the audio. But on that vein, I sort of know where Bethan sat right now, and she might give us a look with the camera. So Bethan, tell us where you are right now, and what space are you in, and describe a little bit about what surrounds you.
Thank you. I think we can resolve this echo. Apologies, it's my end. You can blame the Brazilian Wi-Fi. So I tried to find a quiet corner, which is no easy feat. This convention centre is absolutely enormous. I think our amazing comms team might have a video they can put up here of the conference centre, just a quick video I took earlier today. There it is. So we're in the longest corridor in the world, it feels like. And this corridor is full of people and meeting rooms and negotiation spaces. And I am currently trying to hide within the media centre. So if I duck back here, you can see a rather sterile looking media centre room. And this is full of journalists and people who are trying to communicate about how and why this process matters. So we're all here, and it comes back to the question that you discussed a moment ago, Lee, about why does this matter for the UK? And most of these journalists here are all trying to answer that question. So how does this matter for their local domestic audience? And it matters because we're in, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're now looking towards implementation of these agreements. And you can't do implementation without domestic action. So everything now has to be rooted in how do we implement effectively, justly, quickly at the local level. So that includes national decision making from Westminster, but it also includes the local level, regional level, and everything in between. I hope the sound issue is okay.
Yeah, I think I think there's a little bit of microphone. If everyone's getting it as I'm getting it, you can hear what you're saying, but it's a bit echoey in the background. But we're going to keep going because I can hear you. So this has been described as the nature COP, hasn't it? The nature COP, or even the forest COP I heard today. So give us an element of. I know we're only on day one, but you're already, I know what you're like. You'll be having lots of conversations with people. Is that at the get-go something that you're sensing is, bringing together the climate and the biodiversity issues together? Do you sense that is going to be a really big thing as we hope?
We've definitely sensed that from the Brazilian presidency, yeah. So what I mean by that is every COP has a leadership by the host country, and in this case it's the Brazilians, and they've really centered nature within this COP, and that's why it's been hosted here in Belém. Belém is not a capital city. It's not the capital of Brazil, but it is the capital of the state of Para, which is one of the major Amazonian regions in the country. And them doing it and hosting it here in Brazil is a symbol of the importance of forests as a major solution, and also something that's a major threat from climate change. So it being hosted here is incredibly significant. As you said, we're only on day one for the negotiations. Things are just starting. However, we are really hoping, and Zevasel is part of the work to try and ensure that nature no longer is on the sidelines of the negotiations, but is at the centre of it. It's also worth noting that COPs are a set of negotiations, yes, but they're also much bigger than that now. There are literally thousands of events that are happening over the course of 2 weeks. There are going to be multiple political statements and endorsements, and lots of countries coming together with launching new things. And you can definitely see that nature's at the heart of that. The thing that we want to see, the thing that we're pushing for, is that for a very long time, nature has been talked about a lot within the context of the COP as something that's important, but it's never been able to work its way into the centre of the COP, into the negotiations themselves. So we need to see that transfer over. And we also need to see that we're actually really bringing together these international commitments. And what I mean by that is we now have the Paris Agreement, but we also have the Convention on Biological Diversity's Global Biodiversity Framework that was passed in 2022. The Wildlife Trusts were there, so were we. So we have these two sister conventions, these two sister agreements, but we need to make sure that they're being implemented together in a joint up way. And at the moment, they're not. So there's also a lot of work going on there. But to come back to your question on the significance of it being a nature COP, absolutely. It's everywhere. You literally can see the jungle outside the venue, which I wasn't quite expecting, but you really can. And there is real symbolism in it being here. But it also is, for me, a reminder of what's at risk, and a reminder of what we're at risk of losing. So it's a real incentive to try and make sure that we deliver out of these 2 weeks.
So just let's talk about that amazing Amazon rainforest that's not that far away from you now. Well, you know, it's a beautiful thing. It's full of nature and biodiversity and trees and carbon and all the rest. But if if you're in the UK and you're someone that thinks, well, I don't really, it's not really top of my agenda. Why does it matter to someone in the UK that rainforest sustains healthily?
Well, the Amazon, like all rainforests, are absolutely essential for global climate stability. And that's because all of nature is essential for global climate stability. We sometimes, and too often, talk about climate and nature as if they're separate, and they're really, really not. The science makes that incredibly clear. The science also makes it clear that we're at the risk of extremely dangerous tipping points in these natural ecosystems if climate change continues on its current path. So we've got a lot of work to do. I think for the UK, it's a good question because we constantly need to be reminded that these climate change and biodiversity loss, which should be thought about together, are the definition of a global issue. We cannot think about them as something that only matters to specific countries. We have to be thinking in a much broader sense. But also, I think for people in the UK, there's a responsibility and an importance to think about how that we actually actively benefit from the health of the Amazon and the health of the West Congo Basin rainforest and the health of rainforests across Asia. They are essential for health and global well-being, but also the health and well-being of local people in the Amazon region. I think it may be difficult to sort of see the direct link to the Amazon in the UK. But what we can know, and what we do know, is the UK is the most nature depleted country in Europe. And that COPs like this and things like the CBD's Global Biodiversity Framework are a real reminder and an incentive that we need to restore the nature that we have, we need to protect what we have, and we need to be working as part of a global community, not sort of siloed in our own little boxes. You're on mute for me. I don't know if you want to do something else.
That's a faux pas. Will there be, this is a question in the chat, Bethan. So will there be any fossil fuel companies at COP30? What are they doing?
Yes, so there are. There will be. It's a difficult question because actually businesses, so Severcell is an observer in this system, and we're known as an observer. We have a little observer on our badge, which means that we're not a party, we're not a country. But fossil fuel lobbyists can get into this system through a variety of ways. They can be badged through other organisations, they can be badged through countries. So they are here, and it is a major area of contention and difficulty. We don't know how many are here. That isn't something that we'll know for quite some time, probably. But they are present at almost all COPs. But it's also worth noting that although they are here, so are so many other people from across civil society that are working diligently and courageously to try and create a justice-driven system, and one that is delivering for the world's most vulnerable, and one that is working to tackle misinformation and to show that we can decarbonise, that we can protect nature, and that we don't have to sort of succumb to the influence of these fossil fuel companies, which is definitely present, but so is the incredible advocacy and bravery of civil society organisations from across the world. I've seen so many people from the Amazon region just in my few hours here today. I've seen friends from Asia, from Africa, from all over the world. And it's a constant reminder that although we do have fossil fuel lobbyists on the ground, we also have those that are working diligently to try and find solutions.
Right. Now, I know, having been to not as big a congress as that, but a major congress recently, that there's a lot of things to choose from. So how are you going to decide tactically where you spend your time at COP30? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because there's so much going on. There are, as I said, hundreds, if not thousands, of side events over the 2 weeks. But there's also dozens and dozens of negotiating items. The way we work and the way almost all NGOs work in this space is in collaboration. So we team up with fellow organisations and we work with them to develop solutions. And this doesn't just happen in the 2 weeks. My preparation for this COP and our preparation as MSL has been going on since sort of about a year ago, really, maybe around 9 months or so. It's consistent, and the point is we have to be consistent. Consistency is what makes you successful. But so is collaboration. So everything that we do is in collaboration with other organisations. So, for example, we're working really, really closely with folks like RSPB on the ground here, WWF, organisations from all over the world, not just the big NGOs, but also smaller ones. And we also work really closely with parties as well, so we build up working relationships with countries. So I think that's important to note at the start, but also the areas that MSL are working on have been chosen quite practically and strategically, because we're just a small delegation, we're really tiny. So it's important that we're quite tactical with what we choose. So we've chosen 3 distinct areas. The first is an agenda item that's a real opportunity to deliver for climate and biodiversity synergies. So at that point of how do we bring those decisions and that implementation together across climate and nature. The second is on adaptation. So adaptation is around how do we build up resilience, how do we build up adaptive capacity to climate change, so to try and make people more resilient to climate shock. And we know that ecosystem-based adaptation, to the use of ecosystems, the use of nature-based solutions, is a major tool in how we can equip communities and countries with ways to increase their resilience. So we're also working on something called the Global Goal on Adaptation, and within that there's some specific elements on ecosystems. And then finally, there is something called the Mitigation Work Programme, the MVP. And the Mitigation Work Programme is a really interesting one, because this year it has a real responsibility of trying to build on a success we had a few years ago. So back at Dubai, the Dubai COP in 2023, there was something called the Global Stocktake. And in the Global Stocktake was a really important commitment to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. A major moment, it was really, really significant. But we don't have a plan that countries can follow of how we get there. So this COP, there's a moment, an opportunity for a set of recommendations to be published on how do we get there, how do we push countries, and how do we support countries vitally to meet that vital commitment of halting and reversing deforestation by 2030. So those are our 3 areas, but when I mean that there are so many, there are like over 25, I believe, maybe, I'm not quite sure, but around 25 agenda items. We've chosen 3 because that's where our strengths are, and also we know that that's where our allies are as well, and our networks are all working to support each other. You know, you fill each other's gaps, and that's the way we operate on the ground, and do so in the months and years running up to these meetings.
Fascinating. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to give you two more questions. If anyone else does have a question, please stick it in the chat and we'll try and squeeze that in. So give a ray of hope for those people globally, but certainly in the UK, that might have a bit of climate anxiety and feel that, you know, they can't do anything. Give them a bit of hope from COP30 and what's happening or what's maybe happened and what they might do individually.
I think the thing I have to remind myself of as someone who also has climate anxiety, is that we know this process is working. The Paris Agreement is working. And I say that because if you go back to when the UNFCCC was first created, so around 1992, around that time, even up to the 2000s, we were on track for over 4 degrees of warming by 2050, which is absolutely catastrophic. And now, over the course of 25 years of diligent work, of 10 years since the Paris Agreement, we're on track at the moment for around 2.7. Now, is that good enough? No, we need to get it down to under 1.5. That's absolutely paramount. But it is successful. It is a testament to the power of not only these multilateral processes, but also everything that they inspire, the markets that they inspire, the political leadership that they inspire. We have to remember that the UK was the first country in the world to have a net zero target, and the passage of the Paris Agreement was a vital part of the UK having the gumption and the feeling that they had the legitimacy to pass that net zero target. So I think that's the thing I'd remind people, is that although we have an extraordinary amount of work to do, we know this process is working because we know that that number keeps dropping. So I think that sort of the overarching encouragement I give. I'd also give encouragement because I know a lot of the coverage around these COPs can be quite negative. I know that we often see the headline of, oh, countries walk out of negotiations. But the things that those headlines never cover is that the countries almost always walk back in, that they come back into the room, that they decide to collaborate, and that we do slowly but surely reach consensus and progress. And it's also worth noting that this is what's known as a consensus-based process. So there is no voting in the UNFCCC. If one country disagrees, the whole thing fails. So consensus is king. That's the tagline. So reaching that is no mean feat. It's a really difficult thing. And every day when I'm here and at the COPs I've attended previously, I get to witness my NGO colleagues, my academic colleagues, these collaborators that I've built up working relationships with. And I get to see us push and work together to try and find solutions that work. And it's that moment of watching people commit their careers and their lives to this work, to try and find these solutions. That's the most inspiring thing to me. I come here and yes, I'll be exhausted in 2 weeks, but I will also be incredibly inspired by the people who I have the privilege of calling my colleagues and my collaborators. And they are the reason why the Paris Agreement is working, right? Like everybody is. It's the momentum and the optimism, and we have to keep that moving. So that's what I would sort of suggest to viewers who might be feeling anxious.
I'm going to throw maybe a two-part question at you. There's a question from Jane around adaptation, but I'm going to nudge that back to the next session we have. So I'm going to finish with a question around hope. One is your personal hopes, but the first part of my question is a question from Viola Langley, and thanks, Viola. So how hopeful are you of implementation at COP30? And then what would be any other personal hopes you might have?
That's a lovely question. Let's end on hope. It's a good way to end. I am hopeful, and not just because I feel that we have to be. I feel that hope is a choice in these spaces. It's something that you can choose to have, but also because we know it's working. We know that implementation is happening. We know that fossil fuels are reducing and that the transition to renewable energy is happening at a pace, an extraordinary pace, and that the markets are moving, the policies are moving. Of course, we're also in a very unique and difficult political time. The US is not here at this COP, and that is important. But we also know that despite that, implementation is still happening. So I think that is really hopeful for me. I also think there's extraordinary hope in that this is the nature COP, right? Like that the presidency chose for this to be a COP about forests and a COP about the natural world, and that is a real step change to where we were 10 years ago within this process. Really, really significant. And that takes us into my personal hopes. My personal hopes is that can continue, that we can move nature from the margins to the centre of this process. And this will be a gradual work. It will be small wins, but they will build something. They always do. And in particular, I'm really, really hopeful, and I hope when we speak at the end of this COP, I'll be able to give you, I hope, a positive update on where we got in the negotiations around really trying to make concrete progress on bringing the climate work and the nature work at the multilateral level together in a really meaningful way. And if anybody's more interested in learning about a bit more of that detail, I'd love to steer you towards our ZSL position, which you can find on our website. And also feel free to reach out to me. Very happy to help. But that hope, I think my hope is rooted in the fact that we know it's working, but we also know it can work better. And it's our responsibility as civil society, as experts, as organisations that are driven by science and evidence to try and move that hope into action.
Bethan, that's brilliant. I'm going to manage time, but thank you so much for what is our first live link up from COP30. For those of you that have joined us, thank you. Thank you very much for the questions that we've had. Thank you for posting where you're from. I'm going to do a little shout out for Borwin, who's joining us from Liberia. Borwin, you may get the most remote person that's joined us today. There will be another session, at least one during COP, and then definitely one as a wrap up at the end. So please watch the normal channels for when we announce the date and time of the next one. But thank you very much for attending this evening, and let's all hope and be positive about what COP30 is going to deliver for the climate and nature.